Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We are starting our weekend with watches, and everything you see is for sale. Reach out to me, tmasso at thewatchbox.com, for your questions about any of these watches. If you're watching this Saturday morning, all watches are in stock. You can also buy, trade, and sell with the Watchbox because we are always looking to build inventory. Maybe you want to swap a watch you have for a watch you see here, or perhaps you're looking to sell and raise funds for a new acquisition. We pay cash, we pay fast, we will buy an entire collection, no upper limit on value paid. To buy, trade, or sell, reach out to tmasso at thewatchbox.com for pricing. Okay, let's start with a watch that represents the meat of the market in all-arounders. Rolex Oyster Perpetual Datejust 41 in steel, reference 126300, 41 millimeters in steel, less than 12 millimeters thick. It's about 11.6 millimeters thick, but it is broad at over 50 millimeters from lug to lug, which is why I recommend this full-size Datejust on Oyster bracelet for a wrist of at least 15 centimeters circumference. But it's quite a looker. Shock resistant, anti-magnetic, 100 meters water resistant, automatic winding, stainless steel, and of course incredibly well loomed with that signature Rolex Chromolite blue lume. This is a watch with a nearly 3-day power reserve and a chronometer certification, but Rolex goes one better, taking the chronometer certified movement and adjusting it inside the watch for 6-position accuracy so that it keeps time to tolerance of no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per 24 hours. That is the modern substantive basis for this superlative chronometer. Rolex has finally given us a reason, and that reason is adjustment above and beyond chronometer standards. Now we have a watch right here that represents something a little bit more rarefied. Originally launched back in 2016, this is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak double balance wheel open worked, and it is a dramatic machine. As you can see, 41 millimeters in rose gold. It is exactly what the name implies. I think we should probably replace open worked with open wrought to be syntactically correct, but you can see either one describes adequately what this is, though perhaps no words can describe adequately how beautifully it's made. I often slate Audemars Piguet's mainstream movements for being finished by purely mechanical means. Well, here almost everything has been finished manually. You can see how many sharp interior angles there are where bevels meet, too many to count, dozens. We have an open wrought barrel. We have not one, but 2 separate balance structures. As you can see on the reverse side of the movement, the watch has an entirely separate balance wheel. Now, if you look carefully, you can see both these balance bridge structures feature a free sprung balance, but the actual stud holder for the hairspring is positioned 180 degrees apart. So what you get is a system whereby in any position, let's say it's just sitting on your dresser at night, one hairspring will be running fast due to the influence of gravity, the other by an equal and opposite margin will slow down. So it instantly and in any position achieves the Torbjorn's original intent of correcting gravitational timing error. The watch is automatic winding with a 45-hour power reserve, and perhaps surprisingly for something so ornate, it is actually quite well loomed and easy to read. It has a screw-down crown, it is 50 meters water resistant and surface swimmable, 41 millimeters in diameter and under 10 millimeters thick. You can see it features white gold bezel bolts inside the rounded octagon that Gerald Chanta was originally inspired by a vintage diving helmet to design. The timepiece has a very robust clasp and bracelet, and on the wrist, the feeling of weight is incredible and compelling. It's beautifully hand-finished inside and out. This is actually one of the few Royal Oak models that is as beautifully finished on the inside as it is on the outside. This bracelet by itself, just the bracelet, takes 9 to 11 hours to hand-finish to create all of the satination, the sharp breaks, and the polished bevels. It really is quite special. In an era when it seems like integrated bracelet sports watches are a dime a dozen, well, perhaps not a dime a dozen because they're all quite expensive, but they're common. They're everywhere. This is not. This is, at Audemars Piguet, a piece you need to apply to gain permission to buy. Now, let's say you want rose gold sports watch goodness, but at a lower price. Well, in 2019, Rolex redesigned the Yachtmaster collection. This is the 126621 in 904L steel and ever rose red gold, 40 millimeters in diameter, 70-hour power reserve, and well under 12 millimeters thick. Now, it's 40 millimeters in diameter, but it's got a very different look and feel on the wrist than the previous 40 millimeter Submariner, for example. This is a more graceful watch. I've often described this as a watch equally at home on the deck of a the yacht or in the ballroom of the yacht club. It's 100 meters water resistant, shock resistant, anti-magnetic, and it has a bezel that is solid gold, not an insert on a base metal. It is a solid gold bidirectional yachtsman's bezel used for timing the countdown to the start of a match or one race within a regatta series. As you can see, there is absolutely no shortage of chromolite blue lume here. And you might not expect it, but this is one of the double locking Oyster clasps. You might expect just a lift lock system on the Yachtmaster, the way we get a single beacon hook lift lock on the Datejust 41. But the Yachtmaster has both the clamshell lock system and then the spring-loaded lift lock. And you can see right there with the beacon, the hook, how that latches once and then this latches a second time. This is an awesome watch that's a ton of fun to wear and a fantastic piece to start your summer off right in 2022. Now, let's take a look at something very different. One of my all-time favorite watches from Ulysse Nardin. This is the Sonata Cathédrale. It is the Cathedral Gong Sonata. You see how there is a minute repeater governor, a minute repeater cathedral gong that encircles the movement 1.5 times, and then there is a black polished minute repeater striker that strikes the gong. So you get the beautiful tonal quality, lyrical musicality, and sustain of a minute repeater, but you get it in an alarm watch that's also a dual-time GMT with a big date. Now, taking a quick look at the watch, you can see it is in white gold, 42 millimeters. These are exceptionally low-volume watches at UN, both because of the quality of the finishing that goes into the movements and because of the complexity of the mechanism. I can turn the alarm on or off. I wind the alarm with the crown in a counterclockwise direction, and I wind the watch in the opposite direction. Now, there are a couple of different ways to set this watch. Let me move the hands out of the way. Oh, by the way, as if this watch didn't already accomplish enough, it's quite well loomed. Now, taking a quick look at the dial, you can see that there is a big date, double digit, with a quick set system. We have two different ways of looking at the alarm setting. So you have this conventional clock style alarm, and then you have a countdown alarm, which allows you to set the watch in a 24-hour format. So, for example, this can only resolve to 12 hours, but the countdown can be set in a 24-hour format. And you can see, if I want to activate the alarm immediately, all I do is turn the alarm off and set the countdown to 0. So the countdown makes it very easy to demonstrate the alarm if you want to show it off to friends. We have a lot of interesting finishing elements on the dial that are usually reserved for the case back of conventional watches. We have blued screws, we have Côte de Genève, we have satination, we have mirror polishing. It is quite attractive, and you can even see we have applique dart style indices on an enormous Rehaut outboard that forms a loomed chapter ring as well as the hour scale. Now, the watch has a fascinating case form. It's only 50 millimeters from lug to lug, so while it looks huge, it's merely large. On the reverse side, the movement's quite impressive. Caliber 67, which has an ungodly number of jewels. You can see it has 109 jewels. Automatic winder with a 45 to 48 hour power reserve. It beats away at 4 hertz and has this beautiful roughed or industrial finish white gold rotor with blued screws at the center. It is a high horology movement in a high horology watch, and UN, along with Girard-Perregaux, has seen its stock on the rise this year as the ownership is now the management. The management under Kering, the previous corporate parent, bought out the company, and now UN and Girard-Perregaux are getting back to their high horology origins as independent horology, free from their corporate shackles. And this is a company that's going places. The Cathédrale was launched several years after the 2003 launch of the Sonata, and it really is the best of the original generation of the Sonata. It has that handsome look and stance on the wrist, but with the elevated aural experience of the cathedral gongs. Chronographs in white gold, and we've got two great ones. Here from Rolex, we have a Rolex Daytona with meteorite dial and white gold case, 116519. The white gold case is the table setter for the dramatic meteorite dial. Widmanstätten patterns, what you're looking at is iron that's been oxidized create these lovely crystalline forms, and then they stabilize it so it doesn't continue to degrade, so it will look like this forever. No two Rolex meteorite dials are ever exactly the same because of the way they are made. We have white gold Roman numerals, including a watchmaker's 4. We have a triplock crown in gold. You know that because the center dot is the largest. You can put the watch on a water-resistant strap, and with 100-meter water resistance, this is a timepiece that you could take swimming should you choose. It is, of course, the in-house caliber, as it's a 6-digit generation, 72-hour power reserve, chronometer certified, shock-resistant, anti-magnetic, vertical clutch column wheel, and because it's on a strap, it is super short across the wrist, only about 47 millimeters, which makes this a viable power watch for him and for her. I cannot overemphasize, this is one of the coolest ways to get into a modern Daytona, because the white gold strap-clad meteorite dials are a rarity within a rarity. You don't see many strap-clad white gold modern Daytonas. Add the meteorite dial and you've really got something exceptional. That said, if you want a bit more lume and you want to go upscale, well, where do you go from Rolex? Well, you go across town to Plan-les-Ouates at Patek Philippe, and that's what we have here in the 5172G. 41 millimeters in white gold. This replaced the 5170 back in 2019, and unlike the 5170, which launched in a rather frumpy silver dial Roman numeral yellow gold variant back in 2010, this watch immediately arrived in the variant we all wanted to buy. Blue dial, white metal, fully loomed, and the watch is quite well loomed. We have an absolute blazing dial for a dress watch. You can see those modified syringe-style hands for the hours and the minutes. We've got a tachymeter scale outboard, which is a sporty refinement that can be used along with the chronograph seconds hand to gauge the speed of an object. Now, the watch is a modern Patek movement, which means it has hacking seconds, no issues there. It takes the case profile from the 5320 perpetual calendar, itself inspired by the vintage 2405 reference. And you can see we also have pump style pushers with a lovely turbine outer face. Taking a quick look, you can see that there's also a step in the case flying between the case and the bezel. So it's a highly articulated case without a lot of sheer planes. So visually it doesn't appear as large as it is. Now, the timepiece also includes caliber CH 29-535, bigger than the previous Lemania-based movement. It has a pawl and pawl wheel instantaneous minute jumper. It features a lateral clutch, and you can see that the lateral clutch is combined with a black polished column wheel. When you activate the mechanism, you can see that a lateral clutch allows you to see all. Now, the problem with a vertical clutch, even though it's more efficient, is that it's ugly. Vertical clutches tend not to be very visible, and they add thickness to a movement. Lateral clutches are considered to be higher level watchmaking at Patek Philippe, and only more advanced watchmakers work on the lateral clutches. The column wheel is black polished, and it's capped for a specific reason. Traditionally, Geneva style, a column wheel would be capped in case of a shock, because under conditions of immense shock, the horns of the chronograph system, the clutch, the reset hammers, the actuating levers, they could pop out of the crenellated peaks of the column wheel. So though aesthetically beautiful, the cap does historically have a functional rationale, and that's true of most finishing elements. The watch has an overcoil hairspring, it's 6-position adjusted, it has a 65-hour manual wind power reserve, and the column wheel feel is quite excellent. Among the absolute best that I've experienced, both the sound and the tactile impression it leaves. We have both brass bridges and plates, and then for the chronograph, we have stainless steel components, and all of them are immaculately finished from every angle. A really special watch, and one that feels just as good as it looks. It's not excessively large, but it's a full-sized watch. So don't expect it to be petite, but then again, it's not going to overwhelm your wrist. If you could wear that Daytona a second ago, you can definitely wear this. That said, uniquely among the Octo Finissimo models, the Chronograph GMT 100 meter is a fairly large watch that requires a large wrist to match. So you can see here we've got the Octo Finissimo Chronograph GMT. This is a new version for 2022 in rose gold, now available pre-owned. The timepiece takes after last year's 100 meter in steel, which means it's 43 millimeters in diameter. It's still pretty reasonable at 9.1 millimeters thick. And then from lug tip to lug tip, it's 54.3 millimeters across the wrist. This is why I say you need a fairly large wrist to wear it, because my 16 centimeter circumference wrist is the lower limit to wear this watch well. Any smaller and we'd have lug overlap. Now, taking a look at the dial, you can see that Bulgari did something that is just a little bit fun. They use different lume color for the hour indices, the numeral, and the hands, so it's quite easy to read at a glance. The watch is also 100 meters water resistant with a screw-down crown. The screw-down crown has a ceramic cabochon outboard. Now, the watch includes hacking seconds, which is not true of other Octo Finissimo models. This BVL 318 movement has hacking seconds. It also has a second time zone. You set it. It looks like it's part of the chronograph, but you actually set the second time zone first. And once you've set the second time zone, so that's set to midnight right there, you push the crown back in and you use the pusher adjuster over at 9 o'clock to set the local time. That's how that works. The watch does include a movement based on the BVL 288 from the automatic Torbjorn. Now, Bulgari could have stuck a chronograph module on top of the BVL 138 from the Octo Finissimo automatic, and that would have been just fine. The watch still would have been thin, it would have looked good, most people would have been happy. But instead of creating a modular chronograph out of their existing base automatic, they took the automatic with peripheral rotor from the Torbjorn, they removed the Torbjorn mechanism, and they inserted the chronograph into the donut hole at the center of the movement. So peripheral rotors are rare and they are exotic. They give you the advantages of a micro rotor in that the watch is as thin as a manual wind, the case back is as open and attractive as a manual wind, but you get the convenience of an automatic. And impressively, given everything that's packed into this 100-meter case, it has a 55-hour power reserve. Now, there is a column wheel because there's a column wheel lateral clutch chronograph mechanism. The feel is really quite good. It has a full balance bridge for better shock tolerance, and with 55 hours of power reserve, automatic winding, a chronograph, and a GMT, you can see why I think 9.1 millimeters is not terribly thick. The case, in a combination of polish and satin, really plays up better than earlier versions of the Octo Finissimo family, which were generally media blasted or all satinated. This is a case that really needs a contrast between polish and satin to bring out its best. My favorite feature on the watch has always been the juxtaposition of the round bezel and round sapphire with the faceted polygon inboard. It is very, very cool. You do need a bigger wrist to enjoy this watch, but this is a timepiece that you could wear all the time if you've got the wrist for it. If you want a more wearable sports watch, well, here you go. A 2020 launch dedicated to celebrating the 62 MAS of 1965. That was the first Seiko diver. This is the SLA43, sometimes known as the Prospex Seiko Lux, a 1,700-piece limited edition for 2020. It's 39.9 millimeters in stainless steel. It's a 200-meter diver. It has a dramatically cambered sapphire that's designed to read as a vintage plexiglass, but make no mistake, it is a sapphire. The watch has a beautiful satinated case with squared off lug ends, no beveling, straight narrow case band. The original watch would have been 37 millimeters, so this isn't that much bigger than the original. There's plenty of luminescence on the dial, and as you can see, the bezel pearl is well lumed, so you can use that bezel for timing. The action of the bezel, it's 120 click. It is one of the best overall bezel feels I've ever experienced. It's up there with the best of the 50 Fathoms, the Rolex dive watches, and oddly, the Calibre de Cartier diver, which was an unexpected star in that regard. This is a wonderful combination between silky glide and sharp detent. Now, we have a silicone strap here in black. There's another one that comes with the watch. The watch comes with two straps, one blue in silicone, one black in silicone. This watch comes with both. We have a black and steel strap minder and then a strap buckle, an Ardillon, with a combination of polish and satin. You can see that the watch features a dolphin on the reverse side. It is a limited edition, individually numbered, made in Japan. And yes, it has caliber 8L35, but 8L35 is based on the Grand Seiko 9S65. So this is made by a Grand Seiko watchmaker in the Morioka studio that makes the Grand Seiko 9S65. The only difference is the timing standards between the two, but though these watches aren't rated as Seikos to run to exceptional tolerances, they generally exceed stated performance. The timepiece does have a 50-hour power reserve, automatic winding, hacking seconds, and a quick set date, and it wears beautifully on a smaller wrist. Really, you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 13.5 to 14 centimeters circumference because it is fairly short at 48 millimeters from lug to lug. Another great sports option if you want something for smaller wrists is this Aorus Big Crown Roberto Clemente limited edition. Roberto Clemente, for those who maybe don't recall his era or aren't into American baseball, was a 15-time All-Star outfielder who played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and his final hit was his 3,000th, which was a great milestone for all baseball players. That essentially punches your ticket to the Hall of Fame. But he was admitted to the Hall of Fame with the 5-year waiting period waived because of the fashion in which he ended his term in baseball. He was flying earthquake relief supplies to Nicaragua to personally oversee the distribution to make sure nothing went to corrupt government officials, and the plane on which he was flying with the supplies crashed. So he was voted into the Hall of Fame within 1 year of his death, which bypasses the 5-year waiting period that is standard for Hall of Fame induction. Now, the watch includes the image of Roberto Clemente on the reverse side. It has a 3,000-piece edition number, of course, 3,000 hits, 3,000 pieces, and it includes Pittsburgh Pirates colors on the dial, so black and gold. Now, this is great if you're a general Pittsburgh sports fan. Those could be Steelers colors, but otherwise it's a very subtle use of steel and gold, or I should say of gold and black. It doesn't immediately pop out as team colors, so it's very attractive. Otherwise, the remainder of the watch is inspired by Aorus watches of the 1930s. It is part of the Big Crown Pro Pilot line, so you get those lovely vintage aviation-inspired cathedral hands, you get the coined bezel, you get the big crown, and we get a lovely cambered sapphire that's designed to look like plexiglass. Also, the pointer date, a feature Aorus first introduced in 1938. We have a double-stitched baseball-inspired strap in calfskin. And the watch actually comes with a strap tool and a second accessory strap inside a number 21 branded commemorative boxed set. 21 was Roberto Clemente's number. The watch is 38 millimeters in diameter, which is why I recommend this as a great option for smaller wrists. It's 50 meters water resistant with a screw down crown, which means if you put it on the accessory strap, you can actually swim with it on the surface. It's a lot of fun to wear. It's got a Sellita SW220 inside, which has automatic winding, a 38-hour power reserve, hacking seconds, and a quick save for that pointer style date. This is a cool all-arounder from a company that makes outstanding value in luxury timepieces. Now, let's say you have the smallest of small wrists. We've been talking about good fit. Here's the little giant. 35 millimeters in diameter, 6.9 millimeters thick, and only 40.8 millimeters in diameter. I'm going to show you this reference 81160 on my wrist so you understand that this is a man's watch and can be worn by a man. This is a watch sized to match the taste in men's watches from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, when something between 32 and 35 would have been standard for a men's dress watch. It is a beautifully made watch, and one of the last watches made by any brand to feature a Sigma dial. Those are the a priori marks that from the 70s through the early 2000s represented dials that included gold elements, such as gold indices, gold numerals, and gold hands. It was encouraged by a Swiss precious metal trade organization that went by the acronym a priori, which is why these are often called the a priori marks, or because of the way they look, the Sigma marks. Now, all the fun starts on the reverse side, but don't overlook the case. The bezel and the mid case here are seamless, so there's no seam between case and bezel when viewed from the top. You can also see that the lugs were welded on. This is a very old school, expensive, and laborious way to make a case, because you insert the lug into a slot in the case, you weld them together, and then on all four sides of the lug, you remove all evidence of the welded joint to achieve this sharp break between case and lug. We have caliber 1400 AS, which is the small seconds version of caliber 1400. 1400 was launched back in the year 2001 as one of the first ever Vacheron in-house calibers. And it's a small movement, only 20.65 millimeters across, but that's fine in this 35 millimeter watch. It's a 40-hour power reserve adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer with Geneva hallmark finish. But unlike a lot of later Geneva hallmark movements from Vacheron, this one is ambitious in how it's laid out. You could see that there are sharp exterior points where two bevels meet. We also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sharp interior angles where bevels meet. Now, to this day, that is difficult to achieve with mechanical finishing. And this watch was designed in an era when Vacheron planned to make far fewer watches. and could sustain high-level finishing on a movement like this. Later on, they would simplify their movements increasingly to meet the standards of the Geneva hallmark, but no more. This was actually designed with the notion that it would take a considerable amount of time to produce it. We have a lovely solarization on the ratchet wheel, and you can see that all of the little details here are exhaustively finished. That is why this watch punches above its weight for the value offered and the ergonomic qualities that it offers. Okay, back to big watches, back to sports watches. Now one in titanium from Breguet. This is the Type 21, reference 3810 in titanium. This model was launched, as you see it here, in Thai for the 2011 model year. Now it's a big watch. Though it's not excessively huge from lug to lug at about 49 millimeters, the problem is that it has a strap that flares out. So you need a big watch, big wrist match right here. What qualifies as a big wrist? Well, no smaller than mine. My wrist isn't large, but at 16 centimeters circumference, I can pull this off. Were my wrist any smaller, I could not. Now the watch is well loomed. We'll do a loom shot here. As you can see, it is remarkably well loomed. We even have excellent visibility of the timing bezel, which is a 60-minute count up bezel. Now the watch includes a 24-hour subdial. A lot of people think this is a GMT or part of the chronograph. In fact, it's neither. It is coupled to the local hour hand, so you move one, you move both. But what it does is it lets you know, being an aviator wearing your Type 21, whether you're looking at 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course, you can see we're closing in on 24, so that is 10 p.m. We have satin finished metallic applique numerals. We have a quick set for the date. We have a chronograph that's based on the Luminor 1350 movement, which is one of the best cam lateral clutch chronographs ever made. Automatic winding, 45-hour power reserve. It's a flyback chrono. So as with the original Type 20, which was built for a military aviation contract in France back in 1954, this is a flyback chronograph natively. Now, what you can't quite see, I'll move the... You don't want to operate the chrono when you're setting a Type 20 or 21, but let me show you why. Let me move the minute hand out of the way, and you can see that this watch, like the original Luminor, features a centrally located chronograph minutes hand. So it actually reads 60 minutes right there, and it will read 60 minutes coaxially with the seconds hand, so it's very easy at a glance. It does have an hours register, but it's very easy to read at a glance how many minutes and seconds have elapsed with this system. Unlike a lot of pilots' watches, by the way, if you wondered why I said don't run the chrono when you're setting one of these Luminor calibers, this is why. There is interference between the chrono and the time, and that's just germane to all of those Luminor 1340, 1350s. So you want to stop the chrono before you set the time on this watch. Now, 100 meters water resistant, surprising because most pilots' watches are 30 to 60. You can absolutely swim with this on the right strap. Now, one of the most fascinating features here is that they double finished the case back. The center is satinated. You can see it's a concentric satin, and then there's media blasting outboard. I like the attention to detail. I always like getting a bit more than I bargained for. Throw this watch on the wrist one more time. You can see it has a full deployment clasp. Again, you want a 16 centimeter circumference or larger wrist to wear this watch, as you see. But if you put it on a strap with more flexibility, I believe even a 14 centimeter circumference wrist could wear it because the lugs are short, tapered, and in titanium, the case is very light. Plus, you do have that second timing bezel, so you can time two events with the bezel as well as the chronograph at the same time. Okay, I'm going to blow your mind because neither of the next two watches is going to be my last watch. And you know I like to finish with a big piece. And surprisingly, we've got here a DB28 from Datejust, steel wheels. And this is not our last watch. It's not even our penultimate watch. That's how strong a finish I'm eyeing. So this is a model that was launched in grade 5 titanium, 42.7 millimeters back in 2017. And it was named steel wheels because the mainspring barrels are made of steel and they are evacuated so you can easily see the mainsprings within. The watch has an entirely evacuated dial. As you can see, the deltoid style barrel bridge has been opened up. We still have that deltoid shape. You can see that it now features engraving, deep engraving. These are not traditional Côte de Genève. These are deeply engraved into the metal. The finishing is best in the world. Look how much black polish there is here. Some watches that have outstanding finish only give you black polished screws. Datejust has diamond paste finished black polished surfaces everywhere you look. The center of the bridge underpinning the hands, the cap of the base plate, the full balance bridge. The hands themselves, especially the blued titanium minute hand, that has been black polished and blued. We have a black polished and blued chapter ring underneath the hour track, which includes black polished titanium spheres for the hours. We have a black polished case. And when you turn it over, we have engine turning to the nth degree. We have satination. We have a power reserve that traces the 6 days of power reserve that you manually wind into this watch. We also have a balance of the company's own design, which is fired blue titanium for the wheel with white gold masses outboard to put as much of the mass possible outboard. We have a bullhead winder. It is a screw-down crown. I'll wind it up so you can get a good sense of how it looks in action. I wanted you to see the distinctive balance wheel at rest because the watch features a patented design. Denis Flageolet, who is the genius watchmaker and co-founder of the company, has over 8 patented balance designs. He retires each balance when a new one that will perform better comes to mind. Now, the watch includes a full balance bridge that features 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs. That is for the purpose of chronometry as well as durability against breakage. The point here is, yes, to protect the balance staff pivot, but also to more rapidly recenter the balance staff within its pivot jewels so it can get back to keeping good time. 2 barrels, you cannot accidentally overwind them. And by the way, take a look at the edge. They have mirror beveling or anglage on their sides. This watch may be outrageously avant-garde, but it pays tribute to finishing traditions that predate Datejust by centuries. Of course, the company founded in 2002 has made fewer than 3,000 watches since then, and only makes about 220 watches a year. There's a moon phase made of 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium. It has a convex blued titanium surround. The moon phase needs to be set only once every 1,112 years. The watch also features spring-loaded floating lugs, so regardless of your wrist size, being feather light in titanium and sapphire with the floating lugs, it's going to fit on your wrist well because it can change its geometry to fit your wrist. And you can see that the hour hand here is sapphire, so you can always enjoy the view of the movement below. Okay, so from crazy to insane, here we have the Datejust Dreamwatch 5 Torbjorn Season 1. This watch is a 10-piece limited edition in grade 5 titanium and sapphire. The Dreamwatch 5 originally launched back in 2014. There is a lot to say. The watch is 47 millimeters wide, I guess you could say, and 58 millimeters down the wrist. So I need to show you how it wears because you might think it's excessively large, and it's anything but. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see a little bit like an Omega Ploprof. It wears long down the wrist, but short across the wrist. And being all titanium and sapphire, it is feather light. Some have described these watches as robotic seashells, and I'm not going to argue the point, but there's a lot more going on. You can see the underlying mechanism, just like the DB28 Digital. It is a jump hour, and it is a lot of fun. You can also see at center, we have another one of those 1,000-year moon phases that you saw a moment ago on the DB28. Turn it all over. This is a 10-piece limited edition, so I've covered the serial number, but guess a number between 1 and 10. I like your odds. We have 2 barrels on the reverse side, and even with the jump hour and the Torbjorn, power reserve is still 4 days. And this is no mean Torbjorn. This is the lightest Torbjorn in the world. It's made of a number of different materials: silicon, titanium, white gold, and steel. But, and this is a big but, it operates at 36,000 vibrations per hour. Like in El Primero, it makes 1 circuit every 30 seconds, so it operates at twice the speed of a standard Torbjorn, and it weighs only 0.18 grams. You can see a proprietary silicon escape wheel to reduce friction and improve performance in between servicings. On the reverse side, we have Côte de Béthune, which is similar to Côte de Genève, but they reflect against each other on each side. So the striping machine that lays down the stripes, it's actually reversed on each side. You can see that the entire case has been fired blue, and the process for bluing titanium is proprietary to Datejust. Now you might wonder, what happens if it gets scratched? Well, this is not PVD. This is fired oxidation, which means when the watch goes back for service, they'll polish it back down to the metal and they'll blue it again, so they can actually recoat the watch if it ever gets scratched. So you've got the 30-second high-beat Torbjorn, the twin barrels, and the 4-day power reserve. You've got the 1,112-year moon phase, and then you've got the jump hour, and you have a very, very fetching and modern watch that's almost too modest about its branding. Nowhere on this watch, externally, on the dial side, does it say de Bethune. They know when you have style this distinctive, you do not need to advertise. And in what might be a first, I'm giving a Panerai pride of place after a de Bethune, Torbjorn no less, as the final watch in our show, because this is my all-time favorite Luminor. This is the Luminor Marina PAM 172, a 2003 limited edition of 300 pieces in glorious blue-gray tantalum. So this was one of the special series watches. It features a very flush sandwich dial. It might look like these are printed numerals, but it's actually a very flush, almost like a very fat loomed disc while still wet had the stencil placed on top, and then the loom just oozed up to the surface to become level with the stencil. But it is still a sandwich dial, and being a Luminor, it is quite bright. Of course, in the 50s, Luminor described a less radioactive paint that was the successor to Radiomir. Today, Luminor is the name of a model. Here you can see that tantalum beautifully preserved. This watch has been rarely, if ever, refinished. Usually on Panerai watches of this age, the character lines and the crease lines tend to dull a little bit from refinishing. I see none of that here. I see a few benign marks from careful wear, so I believe this watch may be rarely, if ever, refinished, which is a great buy because when you're getting a special watch like this, you want it in the best possible condition. The locking lever is iconic. Not only is it better than a shouldered crown guard, because let's face it, you can hit a standard shouldered crown guard straight on and damage the crown. Not here. If your hands are wet, sweaty, or gloved, it's easy to unlock this crown. It's also easier to preserve the crown seals. Remember, when this was designed in the late 40s, it was implemented in the early 50s, Rolex was making the cases, and they were Oyster cases and Oyster crowns. So as manual wind watches with pocket watch movements, every single day you would have to thread the crown out, wind the watch again, possibly even reset it if it had stopped. As a result, they were wearing out the crown seals. Here, you compress and then you decompress. There is no threading in and out. The watch is 300 meters water resistant, and it is iconic design here. You know what this is. Covering every part but the crown guard, you know what this is. On the dial side, we have 3 hands, all blued. This is a Luminor Marina with chronometer certification because remember, the Base or the base models cannot be chronometer certified because they don't have a seconds hand. Now, what at first looks like polished steel or maybe titanium for the bezel and the crown guard is actually polished tantalum. This watch is all tantalum. The weight is very impressive. It's 44 millimeters in diameter, and these 44 Panerai watches are actually quite wearable. I'm having no problems wearing this here, even if your wrist is 15 centimeters, maybe even 14. As long as you're okay with the big, bold, brash, chunky, and unapologetic Panerai look, this is actually going to wear fine ergonomically. And they spared no expense. As you can see, they use screws and bars to fix this strap, unlike the spring bars that would later be used as Panerai worked to cheapen its watches. We have a screwed-in case back. We have Panerai caliber OP11. It is based on the ETA 6497, and it is the 6497/2, which brings some upgrades, such as a longer power reserve from 42 going up to 56, and a higher beat rate from 18K going up to 21.6. It's been highly customized for Panerai, and it is chronometer certified. We have solarization on the crown wheel as well as the ratchet wheel. We have a Panerai motif across the bridges, blued screws as well as polished screws, a black polished click, and you can see we have a machined bevel that's machined but quite nice and attractive. I love this repeating Panerai motif. Everything about this watch is awesome, and they sweated the details, even giving you a tantalum pin buckle. This is my favorite Panerai of all time. This or the PAM 80 Independent. For daily use, this. Reach out to tmasso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.